They tell you the Vikings were explorers, warriors, traders who sailed west to Iceland and Greenland, east to Constantinople and Baghdad. They built the first European settlements in North America. But there's a darker engine powering those dragon ships across cold water. An invisible labor force that funded the fleets, produced the sails, and filled the longhouses. 10% of Viking-age Scandinavia was enslaved, maybe more. The word thrall enters Old Norse as property, not person, and the raids that made Viking legend possible. Women were the target. Not silver, not land, women. 821, the Annals of Ulster records a raid near Etar, close to modern Dublin. The entry is short. They carried off a great number of women into captivity. 1 century later, same chronicle, different raid, 3,000 people captured in a single attack. 3,000. Ibn Hawqal, Arab geographer, writes in 977 about a Viking slave trade stretching from Scandinavia to Egypt across the Mediterranean. Dublin becomes a slave market. Hedeby in Denmark. Birka in Sweden. Bulgar on the Volga River. Iron shackles and collars recovered from harbor zones. 6 collars at Hedeby, 4 at Birka, 1 at Dublin. Smaller sites across Ireland, England, Germany. Not for dogs. The design, the placement near wharves where ships dock. The concentration in urban trade hubs, all point to human restraint. If you value documented Viking history and archaeological evidence like this, subscribe. It's the best way to support our work. Also comment from which city you're hearing this from. This script is researched and factual. Using sources from the journal Slavery and Abolition, published in April 2019 by archaeologist Ben Raffield at Uppsala University, Sweden, and from Anna Kellström's Bioarchaeological Analyses of Skeletal Remains at Stockholm University, published in 2016 for the Society for American Archaeology. These are peer-reviewed archaeological studies, not pop history. Now back to the information. The Annals of Ulster use one phrase over and over: a great booty of women, not people, women. Raiding fleets don't just hit monasteries for gold candlesticks and illuminated manuscripts. They hit coastal settlements, river towns, anywhere undefended populations gather. The pattern is clear in genetic data. Iceland gets settled in the late 9th and early 10th centuries. DNA analysis of modern Icelanders published by researchers, including Neil Price at Uppsala University, shows that about 75% of male settlers came from Norway. But over half the women, maybe as high as 2/3, carry Scottish and Irish genetic markers. The numbers don't match unless you're taking women by force. Researchers use the term raid booty. The phrase is clinical. What it describes is not, this isn't just Iceland. The same pattern shows up wherever Vikings settle. Scottish populations carry DNA from Saharan tribes who came to Spain with the Moorish conquest in the 8th century, then got captured in Viking raids on Spain, shipped to Dublin, sold as slaves, and ended up in Scottish households in the 9th century. But DNA doesn't lie. The trade routes are written into chromosomes. Why women? 3 reasons: labor, sex, economics. Viking society runs on a stratified class system. Free men at the top, carls in the middle, farmers and craftsmen, thralls at the bottom. A 14th century poem, original text, likely from the end of the Viking era, lists thrall names: bastard, sluggard, stumpy, stinker, lout. These aren't people to the Norse, they're cattle. Norwegian legal codes used neuter gender for slaves, not he or she. The masculine gender is reserved for free people. Slaves live in the darkest end of the longhouse with the livestock. If a slave doesn't obey, you beat them. An owner can punish as much as he wants. The law doesn't stop him. If a slave dies, Ahmad ibn Fadlan writes, they leave him there as food for the dogs and birds, but female slaves have additional value. Sexual exploitation. Ibn Fadlan encounters the Rus, Swedish Vikings operating on the Volga River, in 922. He's a diplomat from Baghdad, sent by the Abbasid Caliph to the Volga Bulgars. What he sees shocks him. He describes it in detail. The Rus arrive by boat, moor at the river, build wooden houses on the banks, groups of 10 or 20 men per house. Each man has a couch. Beautiful slave girls accompany them for trading. One man will have intercourse with his slave girl while his companion looks on. Sometimes a group comes together to do this, each in front of the other. Sometimes a merchant arrives to buy a slave girl from one of them and finds him having intercourse with her. The merchant doesn't leave. He waits until the man finishes. Ibn Fadlan describes how 2 attractive girls, brought for sale, were sexually abused by their owners while others watched. The Rus don't hide this. It's commerce. The girls are merchandise, display models. Ibn Fadlan also notes their hygiene practices. Every morning a slave girl brings a large basin of water to her owner. He washes his face and hands and hair in it, dips his comb in the water, brushes his hair, blows his nose, and spits in the basin. Then the slave girl takes the basin to the next man. Same water, same basin. Every man in the house uses it. Ibn Fadlan calls them the filthiest of all Allah's creatures. But what matters for this story is the casual ownership. The girl is a basin carrier, a sex object, property. Adam of Bremen, writing around 1070, describes Sweden. A man, according to his means, has 2 or 3 or more wives at one time. Rich men and princes have an unlimited number. The practice is polygyny, multiple wives and concubines. This creates a problem. High-status men monopolize women. Poorer men can't find wives. The operational sex ratio skews male. More men than women available for marriage. This drives rating. You need wealth to attract a wife, or you take one by force. A study published in Evolution and Human Behavior in 2016 by Ben Raffield, or Neil Price, and Mark Collard examines this. Polygyny, combined with rising social inequality in late Iron Age Scandinavia, creates a pool of unmarried men willing to engage in risky behavior. Raids offer dual benefits. Plunder raises your status, and you can capture women directly. Viking expansion isn't just about adventure. It's about access to women. Female slaves serve multiple roles: domestic labor, textile production, sexual service, childbearing. The children of slave women are also slaves, even if the father is the master. This creates a self-perpetuating labor source. Some slaves are born into servitude, never see freedom. Strontium isotope analysis of teeth and bones tells archaeologists where someone grew up. Anna Kjellström's team analyzed skeletal remains from graves in Norway, Sweden, and Denmark. Some presumed slaves show strontium levels matching local populations. They didn't come from elsewhere. They were local-born thralls, 2nd or 3rd generation. The trade network operates on a massive scale. Captives move east along the Volga trade route to the Abbasid Caliphate, west across the North Sea to Dublin and beyond, south to Moorish Spain. Silver flows back, Arab dirhams found in Burqa, Wallen, Dublin, silk from China, spices from Central Asia. The Vikings integrate into a global economy. Slaves are the primary export. A female captive in medieval Ireland functions as a unit of value. The cumul. 1 cumul equals 3 milch cows, 1 ounce of silver, 6 to 10 set. In the Irish law texts, land is measured in cumuls. Fines are paid in cumuls. A human woman becomes abstract currency. In Laxdela saga, a man named Huskolder purchases a woman named Melkorka for 3 marks of silver. The merchant has other women for sale at 1 mark each. Melkorka is premium goods, higher status. Another saga records a man named Thrand purchased for 3 marks. The Egil's saga mentions a boy named Olafur traded for a rather good goat, then later exchanged for a cloak. Value fluctuates based on appearance, age, origin, perceived usefulness. Markets don't have purpose-built slave compounds. Archaeological investigations at Hedeby, Burqa, and Dublin find no large open spaces dedicated solely to slave sales. Captives are likely held and sold from private properties or directly from ships. 5 of 6 shackles from Hedeby come from harbor excavations. Ships pull in, business happens on the wharves, buyers inspect merchandise. Deals close, ships depart, the enslaved disappear into households, farms, construction projects. But what happens after the raids, after the market? The women are transported, sold, integrated into Norse households, or shipped farther east. Some become concubines to powerful men. Some work textile production. A single 90 square meter sail for a long ship takes 1 person up to 5 years to produce. Each ship needs 2 sails. There are hundreds of ships. The wool industry demands massive labor. This drives agricultural reorganization in Scandinavia. Archaeologist Neil Price argues for a plantation-like economy. At a site called Sanda in Sweden, excavations in the 1990s revealed a great hall surrounded by small houses. Some Swedish archaeologists now interpret this as a Viking plantation. The small structures housed slaves who worked the land, tended sheep, produced wool, spun thread, wove cloth, all to keep the fleet sailing. We know the treatment was brutal. Anna Kjellström examined skeletal remains of presumed slaves from graves in Norway, Sweden, and Denmark. Signs of abuse, decapitation. Many show mortal wounds that didn't heal, suggesting execution rather than battle injury. The Grimsta grave in the Stockholm area contains 2 decapitated men, likely slaves, possibly sacrificed, on the Isle of Man, in the Irish Sea. A wealthy male Viking tomb includes a young female skeleton, aged 20 to 30. Her skull shows a vicious blade wound to the head, a sword blow that sliced the back of her skull off. Her body was placed face down, hands above her head, possibly indicating rigor mortis had set in before burial. No grave goods, no coffin. 12 to 72 hours later, Cremated bones of horse, ox, sheep, and dog were laid over her body. A 7-centimeter layer of burned animal remains, then a grave marker in the middle. The site is called Balater, excavated in the late 9th or 10th century context. This is the only certain example of human sacrifice found in the British Isles. The interpretation is clear: slave girl, ritual killing, burial with her master, David Wilson, who reported on the Balater burial in 1966, called it a rite familiar to but rarely found in the Viking world, otherwise unknown in the British Isles. The unceremonious disposal, the lack of burial goods, the evidence of violent death, all demonstrate how little she was regarded. She's not a person in death, she's an object, a grave good, something to accompany a man into the afterlife. Other graves show similar patterns. Elise Naumann, archaeologist at the University of Oslo, analyzed decapitated bodies from multiple Viking tombs. DNA analysis shows they're not related to the primary burials. Strangers, likely slaves, combined with signs of mistreatment, the evidence suggests sacrificial killing at the master's death. The practice is mentioned in sagas. It's attested in Arab chronicles. Now archaeology confirms it. Diet analysis from the bones reveals another division. The decapitated individuals ate mainly fish. Their masters consumed meat and dairy. Status shows in the skeleton. Even nutrition is stratified. Around 80 Viking skeletons featured deep grooves across the upper front teeth. All male. Some scholars suggested this indicated a warrior class, but Anna Kjellström found that 2 men buried as slaves in central Sweden also have the grooves. The marks aren't exclusive to free warriors. The function remains debated. Display, ritual significance, pain tolerance demonstration? We don't know. But it forces scholars to rethink assumptions. Slaves occupy more complex social positions than simple labor. Some may have held specialized roles, maybe advisors, maybe bodyguards. The evidence is fragmentary, but sexual abuse is documented. Ibn Fadlan's account is explicit. Female slaves serving sexual needs. Adam of Bremen describes multiple wives and concubines. The law codes and sagas reference sexual access to thralls. When a master dies, his slave girls might volunteer to die with him. Volunteer is a loaded term. In 922 on the Volga, Ibn Fadlan witnesses a funeral. A chieftain has died. 10 days of preparation. His wealth is divided 3 ways. 1/3 to family, 1/3 for funeral clothes, 1/3 for nabid, an alcoholic drink consumed during the ceremony. The family asks the slave girls and young slave boys, which of you wishes to die with him? Usually it's a girl who volunteers. Once she says yes, she cannot back out. Even if she changes her mind, they won't let her. For 10 days the girl is treated like a bride, dressed in beautiful clothes, allowed to drink, fed well, made to sing and celebrate. But she's also forced to sleep with the men participating in the ceremony. Ibn Fadlan describes this as voluntary on her part. Scholars debate how much choice actually existed. Social pressure, psychological manipulation, religious belief, promised afterlife rewards. The line between volunteer and coercion blurs. On the cremation day, the chieftain's body is exhumed from the temporary grave. Dressed in new clothes, placed on a ship pulled onto land, the ship becomes a funeral pyre. 2 horses are run until they sweat, then cut to pieces and placed in the ship. Same with a dog, a cow, chickens, food offerings, weapons. The chieftain sits propped with cushions inside a pavilion tent on the ship. Then the girl is brought. She's given cups of intoxicating drink. She sings. Ibn Fadlan's translator says she's bidding farewell to her companions. Another cup. More singing. The old woman who manages the ceremony, called the Angel of Death, urges her to enter the tent. The girl hesitates. Her head needs to be pushed through the entrance. She can't walk straight. Drunk, drugged, confused. Ibn Fadlan writes, I saw that the girl did not know what she was doing. Inside the tent, 6 men enter. They have intercourse with her, one after another. Then they lay her beside her dead master. Outside the ship, men beat shields with sticks. The noise covers her screams. 2 men grab her hands. 2 men grab her wrists. The Angel of Death loops a rope around her neck. 2 men pull the rope tight. The Angel of Death stabs the girl between the ribs with a knife. Strangulation and stabbing together. Then the closest male relative of the dead chieftain walks backwards, naked, holding burning wood, and sets the ship aflame. Others add wood. The fire consumes everything. Ship, chieftain, girl, animals, offerings. The flames leap high. Then a mound is raised over the ashes. A wooden post is erected with the chieftain's name and his king's name carved on it. This is one account, one funeral, but it's detailed. It's eyewitness. Ibn Fadlan isn't inventing this. He's documenting what he saw, and similar practices are attested elsewhere. Not every funeral involves human sacrifice. Most don't, but high-status burials sometimes do. The girl's role is debated. Some scholars argue she's a vessel for transmitting life force to the dead chieftain. Sexual rites before death ensure his virility in the afterlife. Others see her as pure victim, raped and brutally strangled. Both interpretations have merit. The girl might have believed she was securing a place in the afterlife. She might have been honored in death. But the method is violent. The lack of agency is clear. She cannot refuse once she volunteers. She's intoxicated to the point of confusion. She screams during the killing. Whatever religious significance the act holds, the reality is a young woman drugged, raped, and murdered. Archaeological evidence supports the practice beyond Balletier. In Norway's, at Flakstad, 10 Viking Age individuals were analyzed for stable isotopes in ancient mitochondrial DNA. The material comes from both single and multiple burials. Individuals treated differently. Genetic analysis shows people buried together were unlikely to be maternally related. Stable isotope analysis suggests different social strata. Decapitated individuals in double graves likely were slaves offered as grave gifts. Their diet matches common population levels, while high-status individuals in the same graves had different diets. Slavery operates at multiple economic levels. The sheer scale is difficult to grasp. Estimates suggest 10% of Viking Age Scandinavia's population was enslaved, maybe higher, 25% in some calculations. Ben Raffield's research into the Viking Phenomenon Project estimates this. If accurate, that means in a population of maybe 1 million people across Norway, Sweden, Denmark, 100,000 to 250,000 are thralls. Not free, not people under the law, property, the economic engine of expansion. Women and children are preferred targets. Men perform heavy labor, cutting trees, building ships, rowing, but women manage households, serve elite homes, produce textiles, bear children. Their value is multifaceted. Children are adaptable, easier to integrate, less likely to resist or escape. A child taken young forgets their origin, becomes fully enslaved. Ibn Fadlan mentions young slave boys as well as girls. The differentiation is gendered but not exclusive. Both sexes are taken, both are exploited, but the focus on women in the historical record is pronounced. Dublin becomes the largest slave market in Europe during Viking control. Established as a Norse settlement in 841, the market operates for centuries. Slaves from Ireland, slaves from Britain, slaves from as far as Spain. DNA evidence shows this. Genetic markers in Scottish populations trace back through Dublin to Saharan tribes via Moorish Spain. The trafficking network spans continents. Dublin's docks and quays are filled with human cargo. The economic impact is enormous. Wealth flows into Dublin. The settlement grows. By the 10th and 11th centuries, it's one of the most important trade hubs in northwestern Europe. Slavery funds that growth. Hedeby controls north-south routes between Europe and Scandinavia, and east-west routes between the Baltic and North Seas. At its peak, around 1,000 people live there. Fortifications are erected in the 10th century. The site is valuable enough to defend militarily. Archaeological evidence shows the city's economic importance is also political. Control Hedeby, control the trade, and much of that trade is human. Birka on an island in Lake Mälaren, Sweden. Another major hub, administered by a royal bailiff who lives nearby. Taxes on merchants. A regulated trading environment. This attracts business. Iron shackles found during excavations. Tools of restraint. Evidence of commerce and people. Birka's prosperity relies partly on this traffic. The eastern routes are equally brutal. Slavic peoples become prime targets. The word slave derives from Slav. That's not coincidence. Vikings and other traders capture Slavs in Eastern Europe and transport them south and east. The Volga trade route becomes a highway for human trafficking. Ibn Rusta, 10th century Persian traveler, describes how the Varangians terrorize and enslave Slavs along the Volga. The captives are sold to Byzantium via the Black Sea or to Muslim buyers via the Khazar slave trade. Later, the Volga-Bulgarian slave trade to Bukhara in Central Asia, and from there to the Abbasid Caliphate. Silver dirhams flow back north. The exchange rate is human life for precious metal. The system is sophisticated. Long-distance trafficking requires organization, control, logistics, moving people and goods along routes with little infrastructure and difficult terrain. High risk, but high reward. Charlotte Hiddenstierna Johnson and Tarun Zacherson, archaeologists researching the eastern slave route, note that the full extent of trafficking is unknown. But it includes moving people both ways, not just west to east, also east to west. Goods and humans circulate in complex patterns. The Viking world is interconnected. Trade networks stretch from Scandinavia to Baghdad, from Dublin to Constantinople. Female slaves in particular are imported in large numbers to Islamic markets. Quranic allowance of concubinage means early Islamic traders seek women. This drives demand. The Viking supply, it's a seller's market. Ibn Halkal's account from 977 describes this explicitly. Vikings transport captives to Muslim Spain, to North Africa, to the Middle East. The trade is lucrative, the scale is immense, but not all slaves are exported. Many stay in Scandinavia, integrated into the economy, labor on farms, work in households. Some achieve a degree of status. Ruth Mazo-Karas, scholar of medieval Scandinavia, argues that captives could be incorporated into households through reciprocal relationships. Not all thralls live in squalor. Some concubines or managers of estates. Literary and legal sources suggest variation. A slave's status depended on circumstances, beauty, skills, origin. High-status female prisoners of war could live well, achieve respect, but this is exceptional. Most slaves live hard lives, beaten, exploited, expendable. The law codes are explicit. A slave could own nothing, inherit nothing, leave nothing. They're not paid. In some cases, they're allowed to retain a small portion of proceeds from selling goods for their owners. Rare. Technically, a slave could purchase freedom, but most never accumulate enough. Manumission happens, but isn't common. A runestone from Herning in Jutland reads, Toki Smith raised the stone in memory of Thorgisel Gudmunder's son, who gave him gold and freedom. Toki was a craftsman, skilled enough to be valuable, freed as a reward. But he's an exception. Most thralls die in bondage. What's the lifespan of a slave? We don't know. The skeletal evidence shows abuse and violent death, but not malnutrition in all cases. Some slaves eat adequately, not well, but enough to work. Diet is stratified. Masters eat meat and dairy. Slaves eat fish and grains. Caloric intake sufficient for labor, but the psychological toll is undocumented. The trauma of capture, the loss of family, the constant threat of violence, sexual abuse, these leave no traces in bones. The human cost is invisible in the archaeological record. Children born to slave mothers are slaves. This creates generational bondage. A woman captured in a raid might have children by her captor. Those children are thralls. They grow up enslaved, have their own children, also slaves. The cycle continues until someone is freed or the system collapses. Christianity eventually erodes the institution. The church opposes Christians being enslaved by heathens, but this takes centuries. In the meantime, the trade thrives. How many women pass through the markets? We can't count them. The Annals of Ulster record 3,000 people captured in one raid. How many of those are women? The sources don't break it down, but the phrase great booty of women appears repeatedly. Women are consistently highlighted. They're valuable. They're targeted. The numbers must be staggering. Across 3 centuries of Viking expansion, from 793 to the mid-11th century, tens of thousands of women are taken, maybe hundreds of thousands. The genetic legacy in Iceland alone suggests massive scale. 2/3 of founding females have Celtic origins. That's not peaceful migration. That's systematic capture and trafficking. The impact on the societies being raided is catastrophic. Communities lose women of childbearing age. This destabilizes populations. The Irish, the Anglo-Saxons, the Slavs all suffer demographic hits. Some regions never recover. The Viking Age reshapes European populations through force, and women bear the brunt. In some places, resistance emerges. Iceland in 875 sees Europe's largest slave rebellion since the end of the Roman Empire. Hjörleifur Hrodmarsson's slaves kill him and flee to Vestmannaeyjar, an island. The rebellion is short-lived, but it shows slaves aren't passive. They resist when possible. They fight back. But the power imbalance is enormous. Armed warriors versus unarmed captives. The outcome is predictable. Resistance is crushed. The Viking phenomenon transforms Europe. New trade routes, new settlements, new kingdoms. But the foundation is slavery. Without thralls, the expansion doesn't happen. The labor to build ships, produce sails, work the fields, row the boats, all comes from enslaved people. The wealth to fund expeditions comes from selling captives. The women to populate new settlements come from raids. It's not a side effect. It's the mechanism. And after the raids, after the markets, what happens to the women? They vanish into private spaces, longhouses, farmsteads, ships heading east. The historical record goes quiet. Individual stories are lost. We have names like Melkorka from the saga, but most are unnamed, uncounted, property changing hands. We know they worked. We know they were abused. We know some died violently. Some lived long enough to have children. Some were freed. Most were not. The silence in the sources is telling. Slaves don't write their own accounts. Masters do, and masters aren't interested in recording the suffering of property. Ibn Fadlan is an outsider. That's why his account matters. He sees the Viking world through Arab eyes. He's shocked by what he witnesses. He writes it down. Without him, we'd have even less. The sagas mention slaves, but often in passing. Legal codes define their status, but don't describe their lives. Archaeology finds the graves, the shackles, the bones, but bones don't speak. So we piece together fragments. A chronicle entry here, an isotope analysis there. A shackle in a harbor, a sword wound in a skull, genetic markers in a population. It's detective work, connecting evidence across disciplines, and the picture that emerges is brutal, systematic, economic. This isn't random violence, it's organized exploitation. A trade network spanning continents, operating for centuries, moving human cargo by the thousands, women taken from their homes, transported across seas, sold to strangers, forced into labor and sexual service, sometimes killed as ritual offerings. And the system works because it's profitable. The Vikings aren't unique in practicing slavery. Every culture in this period has slaves. The Romans, the Arabs, the Byzantines, the Irish had slavery before the Vikings arrived. But the Vikings industrialize it. They build an economy on it. The scale and efficiency are remarkable. And the primary commodity, especially in the early phases, is women. The aftermath of the feast is where the system reveals itself most clearly. Victory celebrations mean alcohol, nabid, beer, mead. The drinking goes on for days. Ibn Fadlan describes the Rus as deeply addicted to drinking night and day. Sometimes a man is found dead with a beaker in his hand. During funeral preparations, intoxicating drinks flow constantly. And in these states, with inhibitions erased, the treatment of slave women becomes even more explicit. The feast isn't just celebration, it's demonstration of power, a display of wealth. High-status men show how many thralls they own, how much they can consume, how freely they can use their property. Female slaves serve the drinks, carry the food, and are available for sexual use. Ibn Fadlan's description of the Rus having intercourse with slave girls while others watch isn't limited to trade displays. It's routine. The public nature is important. Witness, status, dominance. After a victory, or just after a successful raid, the celebration intensifies. New captives are present, fresh acquisitions. The men who participated in the raid claim first choice. A hierarchy exists. Leaders get prime selection, then warriors by rank. The women don't choose. They're distributed like any other plunder. Some are kept as personal slaves. Some are designated for sale. Some become communal property for the duration of the celebration. The sources don't detail this explicitly, but the pattern is evident in how slaves are described, as objects, as rewards, as consumables. If you value detailed research into Viking practices and want more content like this that digs into primary sources, make sure to subscribe. Also drop a comment with what topic you want us to cover next. This research draws from peer-reviewed studies, including a work by Ruth Mazo-Karras in her book Slavery and Society in Medieval Scandinavia, published by Yale University Press in 1988, and Jenny Jokins, Women in Old Norse Society from Cornell University Press in 1995, which examined legal texts and saga material to understand slave experiences. Back to the story. The use of alcohol isn't accidental. It serves multiple purposes. In the funeral, Ibn Fadlan witnesses the girl drinks heavily, cup after cup. She becomes visibly intoxicated, can't walk straight, doesn't know what she's doing. This makes her compliant, easier to control, reduces resistance. Whether this is deliberate drugging or social expectation is debated, but the effect is clear. By the time she's killed, she's too impaired to fight effectively. The same pattern likely applies to other contexts. After battles, after raids, during festivals, slave women are given drink, or forced to drink, then used. The alcohol provides a veneer of participation. She's drinking, she's celebrating, but she's property. She has no right to refuse. The legal codes are explicit. A slave's body is available for the master's use. Sexual access is assumed. An owner can do as he wishes. There's no concept of consent when one party is property. The children produced from these encounters are also property. A master who impregnates his slave owns the child. This creates an economic incentive. Each child is additional labor. Female children grow up to be slave women. Male children become slave men. The cycle perpetuates. Some masters free their own children born to slave mothers. But this is discretionary, not required. Many don't. A child of mixed heritage, half free, half slave, remains a slave unless the father acts, and most don't. In Iceland, the genetic data shows massive mixing. 3/4 of male settlers are Norwegian. 2/3 of female settlers are Celtic. The math only works if Norse men are having children with Celtic women at scale. Some of these relationships might be marriages, but given the numbers and the context, sexual slavery and forced concubinage are the primary mechanisms. Women taken in raids, brought to Iceland, used as sexual partners, bearing children who become Icelandic. The founding population of Iceland is partly descended from enslaved women. This isn't unique to Iceland. Everywhere Vikings settle, the same pattern appears. Norsemen, local women, genetic mixing. It's not mutual migration, it's conquest and exploitation. The women don't choose to leave their homes. They're taken. And once taken, they have no autonomy. They're used for labor, for sex, for reproduction. Their value is entirely instrumental. The social structure enforces this. Polygyny means wealthy men have multiple wives and concubines. Adam of Bremen describes princes having unlimited numbers. This creates competition among men. Poorer men can't compete. They need to acquire women through other means. Raiding provides this. Capture a woman. She becomes your property. You've solved your marriage problem. Except it's not marriage, it's ownership. The distinction matters. A wife has some legal protections. She has family ties. A bride price was paid. She has status. A slave has none of these. She can be sold, beaten, killed. No legal recourse. No family to avenge her. She's isolated. Vulnerable. Completely dependent on the master's whim. Some masters are kinder. Some women achieve a degree of respect. The sources mention attractive slave girls living in good conditions, but this is conditional. It depends on the master's favor. It can be revoked anytime. The psychological impact is undocumented, but imaginable. Captured during a raid, family killed or scattered, transported across water to a foreign land, strange language, hostile environment, sold to a stranger, forced into labor and sexual service, no hope of return. No prospect of freedom. Some adapt, some resist, some break. The sources don't tell us. We see the system, not the suffering. The physical evidence tells part of the story. Anna Kjellström's skeletal analysis reveals trauma, healed fractures, signs of repetitive stress from heavy labor. Dental wear patterns showing rough diet. But not all slaves show malnutrition. Some eat adequately, just differently than free people. Fish instead of meat, grains instead of dairy. Enough to maintain working capacity. The master's interest is economic. Dead slaves produce nothing. So most are kept alive. Functional, exploitable. But violence is always present. The threat of it, the reality of it. Slaves who resist are beaten. Slaves who run are hunted. The law provides no protection. If someone else harms your slave, that person owes you compensation. Not for the slave's sake, for property damage, same as breaking someone's tool. You pay the owner. The slave's pain doesn't matter legally. Execution is casual. The Isle of Man burial shows this. A sword blow to the head. No ceremony, no coffin. Face down in the dirt, left to stiffen. Then buried with the master. Her death is functional. She's an offering. A grave good. No different than the horse or the dog also killed and burned. All are possessions sent with the dead man. The fact that she's human doesn't change her status in this context. She's property in life. Property in death. Other graves show similar treatment. At Flakstad in Norway, decapitated individuals buried with high-status people. No kinship relation, different diets, signs of lower social status. Interpretation, slaves killed as offerings. The practice is rare but attested. Most slaves aren't sacrificed, but some are, and the choice is never theirs. The funeral Ibn Fadlan describes is exceptional. Most chieftains don't get ship cremations. Most funerals are simpler, but the treatment of slaves is consistent. They're expendable, useful in life. Potentially useful in death, but never autonomous, never free. The system strips them of personhood. The markets operate with cold efficiency. Slave traders know their merchandise. Women are inspected. Age, appearance, health, origin matters. Foreign slaves are worth more than local-born thralls, according to the 8th century law tract Ureikecht Beck. Exotic goods fetch higher prices. A woman from Ireland sold in Hedeby commands more silver than a local Swedish slave. Why? Novelty. Status signaling. The buyer can display his wealth. Look, I own a foreign slave. This cost me more. The pricing structure is documented in sagas. Malkorka costs 3 marks of silver. Other women sell for 1 mark each. A threefold difference. What makes Malkorka special? The saga says she's beautiful. High status. A king's daughter captured in Ireland. This raises her value. She's not just a worker. She's a trophy. Proof of successful raiding. The buyer gains prestige through ownership. Pricing in cumels shows the same principle. 1 cumel equals 3 cows or 3 ounces of silver. But exchange rates vary by region and period. Some texts say 6 set equal a cumel. Others say 40 set. The variability suggests multiple currencies in use: silver, cattle, land, all cross-referenced to human value. The cumul becomes abstract, a unit of measurement divorced from the reality of a woman's life. She's reduced to a number, an equivalence: 3 cows, 3 ounces of silver, 40 set. The law texts use this abstraction constantly. Fines paid in cumals, land measured in cumals, 7 cumals for a life wound inflicted on a woman or cleric, 14 cumals for killing a freeman. The penalties quantify human life, but only for free people. A slave has no weregild. Killing someone's slave requires compensating the owner, but the amount is property value, not human worth. This legal framework reinforces the system. Slaves are things, the language is consistent. Neuter, gender, no rights, no legal standing. They can't testify in court, can't own property, can't marry without permission, can't refuse sexual advances, can't leave. Every aspect of law treats them as non-persons. And this isn't accidental, it's structural. The society requires a laboring underclass. Calling them property rather than people makes exploitation easier, morally and legally. Christianity eventually challenges this. The church teaches that all souls are equal before God. Enslaving Christians becomes problematic, but this takes centuries to have impact. In the Viking Age, Christianity is spreading but not dominant. Pagan practices coexist with Christian ones. And even Christian slaveholders find ways to justify the system. The enslaved are pagans, or criminals, or captured in just wars. Always a reason, always a justification. Meanwhile, the trade continues. Dublin operates as a slave market into the 11th century. The Norse-Gael kingdom of Dublin reaches its peak around 1000. By then, slavery is entrenched. The economic impact is visible in the archaeological record. Dublin grows wealthy, expands, fortifies, all funded partly by the slave trade. When the Vikings established Dublin in 841, it's a small settlement. By the 11th century, it's a major urban center. Human trafficking drives that growth. The same pattern appears in other Viking towns. Hedeby fortifies in the 10th century. Walls are built. Guards are posted. Why? The town is valuable, worth defending. The economic activity inside includes slave trading. Control the market, control the wealth. Military power protects economic interest, and slaves are a significant part of that interest. Burka shows similar development. Royal administration, regulated trade, legal framework, all designed to extract maximum value from commerce. Slaves passing through pay taxes, or rather, their sellers do. The town takes a cut. Everyone profits except the enslaved. They're the commodity, the source of wealth for others. Never the beneficiaries. The eastern routes are even more lucrative. Muslim markets pay premium prices for European slaves, especially women. The demand is high. Supply increases to meet it. Vikings raid deeper into Eastern Europe. The Volga becomes a highway. Slavic populations are devastated. Entire regions are depopulated by raiding and trafficking. The scale is industrial. Thousands of people moved annually. The logistics are complex. Guarded convoys, rest stops, supply chains. This isn't random raiding. It's organized trade. Professional slavers operate the routes. They know the markets. They understand supply and demand. They maximize profit. Women remain the most valuable export in many markets. Islamic rules allow concubinage. This creates consistent demand for women. The Vikings supply them. Captured in raids, purchased from intermediaries, transported east, sold in Bukhara, in Baghdad, and Constantinople. The silver flows back west. Arab dirhams appear in Scandinavian hordes. The proof is in the coins. Every dirham represents a transaction, often a human transaction. By the late 10th century in Stone, the system is mature. Established routes, known markets, standardized practices, but it's also beginning to change. Christianity spreads, political structures centralize, kingdoms form, laws codify, the Viking Age raids decrease in frequency. Settlement replaces raiding, trade becomes more regulated, and slowly, very slowly, slavery declines, but the decline takes centuries. Even after major raids stop, slavery persists. Domestic slavery continues in Scandinavia into the 14th century. The institution is too profitable to abandon quickly, too embedded in the economy, too useful to the powerful. Change happens gradually, through legal reform, through Christian teaching, through economic shifts, but it happens. For the women who lived through the Viking Age system, change comes too late. Their lives are spent in bondage. Their children are born slaves. Their deaths are unmarked. They're the invisible foundation of Viking expansion, the labor that built the ships, the bodies that produced the next generation, the commodities that funded the voyages. Without them, the Viking Age doesn't happen, but they get no glory, no sagas, No memorial stones, just silence in the record, and bones in the ground. The genetic legacy remains. Modern Icelanders carry Celtic DNA. Modern Scots carry Saharan markers via Viking Dublin. Modern Russians descend partly from Slavic slaves. The mixing of populations is permanent, but the violence that caused it is forgotten or romanticized. Vikings become adventurers, explorers, warriors. The brutality gets sanitized. The slavery gets minimized. The suffering disappears from popular memory, but the evidence is clear. Iron shackles in harbors, sword wounds in skulls, DNA patterns across populations, written accounts from contemporaries, legal codes defining slave status, saga references to thralls, skeletal remains showing abuse. All of it points to the same reality. Slavery was central. Women were targeted. The system was brutal, and it operated at scale for centuries. The final revelation sits in archives and bone pits across northern Europe. In Dublin, Nairnmuzaline, excavations under the medieval city reveal layers of Viking occupation. Among the artifacts, trade goods, coins, weapons, and the subtle absences were shackles once hung in warehouses near the docks. In Norway's Flakstad graves, DNA analysis continues. Every genome tells a story of violence and forced displacement. In Sweden, the Sandasite awaits further excavation. How many thrall houses surrounded that great hall? How many lives were spent in servitude there? At Uppsala University, researchers catalog thousands of Viking age graves. The data accumulates. Patterns emerge. 10% enslaved is likely conservative. The real number might be 15%, 20%. We'll never know exactly. But every new excavation adds evidence. Every isotope analysis reveals more details. The picture grows clearer and darker. The truth sits in a Stockholm archive, a runestone inscription from the 11th century, raised by a freed slave named Tauki. The stone commemorates the man who freed him. But think about what's not said. How long was Tauki enslaved? How many others never earned freedom? How many stones were never raised? How many names were never carved? For every Tauki who gained freedom and could afford a memorial, hundreds died in bondage. Thousands, tens of thousands. This is the calculation the Viking Age requires. For every ship that sailed, how many slaves rowed? For every sail that caught wind, how many thralls spun the wool? For every settlement that thrived, how many captive women bore children? The ratio is uncomfortable, but it's real. Viking expansion has a cost. Women paid it. In labor, in bodies, in lives, they're the profane secret. The dark foundation, the truth that makes the sagas less glorious and the history more honest,